It's becoming increasingly hard not to make videos about Brexit, even though it's not really something I want to do because it's so divisive, because it's so, and honestly, I myself feel very uncertain about what the best way forward is at this point. So I don't really feel prepared to comment in huge detail about the situation. Um, and that's rare for me. I usually have a lot of opinions on things, but I want to talk a little bit, not so much about the technical side of things, but more the sentimental side of things. So the the Weekend Times has had extensive coverage, as all I have an interview there with Laura Kunsberg, who's established herself as a sort of standout reporter. Um, I like Laura Kunsberg. I think she's very professional. She manages to ask tough, assertive questions whilst also being polite about it. And that's a rare mix. Sometimes you get reporters who think that asking tough questions means just being obnoxious. She manages to be direct but maintain politeness, and that's or at least a degree of politeness, and that's rare. Um, so yeah, I'll just show you some of the pages that to give you an idea of what the Times is doing here. Try to keep it still there. This is talking about the ongoing leadership speculation, which is you know, must make the Prime Minister's job very difficult to have that constantly in the background. I'm not going to make a video about leadership just yet until there's an actual date that May announces. That one's covering the large pro Brexit demonstrations in London. I understand that one of them was involving the Brexit bus or whatever it was called from Sunderland down to the capital. Try to keep that as still as possible. You get the idea. Extensive coverage. Um, just for the record, Jon Snow, the veteran porter Jon Snow, apparently made a swiping comment that he hadn't seen so many white people in one place, and that understandably attracted a big backlash. Just for the record, I voted Remain. Those sort of comments don't help anyone. They're just nonsense. I mean, for a start, there's a black guy who's kind of become the opposite of pro EU Steve or anti Brexit Steve or whatever his name is, that guy with the loudspeaker who's become a minor celebrity outside the Houses of Parliament. There's a black guy who always goes around dressing the Union Jack and he's very pro Leave. He's kind of become the Leave equivalent and he's black. So Jon Snow's comments are ignorant. They're not going to help anyone. That sort of nonsense just it doesn't help the Leave side, put it that way. There's plenty, in my opinion, to criticize the Leave side without those sort of absurd generalizations. But anyway, the Times has a piece here, and I think they're being kind of. I don't know whether this is intended as serious or not, but how to make the most of it. If you've always wanted to buy a vineyard in Provence, you've got 2 more weeks to take the plunge. So, what can we do in the next fortnight that may be impossible in April the 13th? I get Brexiteers will say this is Project Fear, but here we go. You can travel hassle free to the other 27 member states. You can emigrate to a warmer Mediterranean climate. There's just time to make it there and have the guaranteed right to stay forever. You can drive to the continent with a UK driving licence and pass through Calais, even if you've only got a month left on your passport. If you're a police officer, you've got an additional fortnight to get in those extradition requests using a European arrest warrant. But I'm not sure if a regular Bobby on the beat has the power to do that anyway. I would have thought it's a superintendent would do that. Anyway, if you're a car maker, you've got a bit more time to stockpile parts. And if you're a consultant working on no deal planning, you've got a few more day rates to make sure your new computer system isn't going to crash on first contact with the outside world. Okay, the bit that perks my interest is you can travel hassle free to 27 member states. I know Brexiteers say this is a trivial thing, but the point is, if we're now going to have to get a visa to travel to other, well, to travel to the EU, if, assuming we leave on April the 13th, Brexiteers say, oh, it's a trivial point. I've seen them dismiss it as, oh, well, it's a little bit of paperwork, who cares? The point is, it wasn't necessary. Over the last 46 years, we haven't had to do that. Now we're going to have to do it. And to me, it's just one thing that is one of many that is going to change. Some things may be for the better, but um, it's just an obvious division. It's an obvious separation from us and the rest of Europe that we are now outsiders. We're going to have to get visas. May well be a trivial point. I understand it's going to cost £6, which isn't a huge amount to get a EU visa. But the point is, that wasn't necessary. If we'd stayed in the EU, that obviously wouldn't be necessary. So that's just an obvious division, an obvious separation from us and the rest of Europe. I'm a bit wary, actually, and this isn't the fault of anyone in the UK. I do think there will be some on mainland Europe who will decide to kind of have this attitude of, oh, the British are leavers, so we'll kind of be show animosity to all of us. And I think this is a minority, for the record. I don't, I think most young Europeans know full well that there are deep divisions in this country. I think the EU knows that. But I have personally experienced, I wouldn't go so far as to call it prejudice, but I have experienced in the Czech Republic and in Germany people who kind of have this attitude of, oh, the British are this. So I won't be very happy if I travel to other European countries and they treat me the way they would show animosity to a person who voted leave. I don't think they should show animosity to anyone, but I will not take it very well if I'm treated with contempt because of what my compatriots have done, and I don't think they should either, for the record. Um, so if you're in another European country and you're kind of taking the attitude, oh, the British are this or that, what does that say about you? I mean, that isn't the way to convince the British to stay in the EU. Most young Europeans, like I say, don't have that attitude, but some do. And it's a regressive attitude. You can't generalize a nation of 66 million people. So I'm a little wary that might be the case. And, I've no evidence for that other than minor previous experience whereby I remember I was on the Czech-Austrian border and the guy looked at my British passport and he made some joke in Czech and a lot of people laughed. I wasn't very happy about that because I couldn't speak the language. I didn't know what that was about. And I'm thinking, well, what's the problem here? I'm in an EU country. This should be, just accept the thing. And, maybe they just weren't used to British travelers. So I'd actually been traveling from Prague to Vienna for a day trip. But yeah, I want to just talk about the sentimental side of this because all the issues around trade, what option we take, all that is, being fiercely debated. Um, what I want to talk about just is how I feel. I still regard myself as a European, but I admit that this whole thing does make an obvious separation. I know there are some people who voted Remain who have went so far as to apply for passports from other EU countries. And I know certainly in my case, being Northern Irish, I can apply for an Irish passport. I've never seen myself as Irish, but I wouldn't 100% rule that out if it did mean traveling to the rest of Europe in an easier way. But then I feel I shouldn't have to do that. I'm British. And I don't feel I should have to kind of adopt another nationality just to make travel easier. I mean, I've no animosity towards the Republic of Ireland, but I'm not Irish. I've never felt Irish. That's just the way it is. I wouldn't totally rule it out, but I'm not in a rush to do it. Also, if I have two passports, say I have dual nationality, British Irish, I think some prominent people, I think Liam Neeson does and a few others, but let's say I had that, Bob Geldof's another, it would definitely cause confusion in, for example, Asian countries. A country that China doesn't recognize dual nationality, so it would cause obvious travel problems in that sense. Um, but in terms of sentiment, let me just make a point here, though, about history. I find it really irritating when Brexiteers talk about Europe like it's another place. Because in the beginning they said, our issue's not with Europe, it's with the EU. But now I see Brexiteers talking about the rest of Europe like they're enemies, like they're in honestly talking like they're in an episode of Dad's Army. And they resent that, but if that's your attitude, if the rest of Europe is alien to you, then don't whinge when people look at that as a negative attitude. I mean, I find it really galling. Forget the EU for a second. Look at British history. You know, you don't even need to be that into history to see what's obvious. Going back to the Romans, we have had influence in our peoples going back millennia. I mean, the Romans, obviously, not just from the Italian peninsula, but from across the Roman Empire. A lot of them were Spaniards, in fact. It thought that the men who built Hadrian's Wall were most likely from Gaul and Hispania, as it was then known. Um, the Normans, the Angles, the Jutes, the Vikings, the Saxons for that matter. So, those talking about being proud Englishmen, you go way back. Your distant ancestors are from Germany. That's where the Saxons came from, Saxony. So the ignorance of a lot of Britons when it comes to basic history, I find rather galling. I appreciate that we're an island nation and we do have a unique identity. There's no question about that. I'm not saying we're just another European country. We do have a unique island identity. There's a whole Shakespeare's Sceptred Isle, that whole thing. It's true. But I would make an analogy with Japan. Japan has always been kind of isolated from the rest of Asia. They've always felt themselves a special nation, an island nation. But we recognize Japan is an Asian country. The United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is a European country. We are culturally European. Yes, we're an island. Yes, we also have a unique identity, but I think it's just plain ignorance to suggest that the rest of Europe has got nothing to do with British history. It's ignorance in the extreme. And those Brexiteers who have that mentality, they just need to get out a history book. Forget the EU for a second. What the point I would make is it's fine to hate the EU. It's fine, then there's some very legitimate reasons to leave the EU. But to me, saying that Europe is a whole other place is ignoring just how much of British history is influenced by the rest of Europe, and how much we have influenced European history for that matter. Wellington, Churchill, they were seen as the saviors of Europe. So to divorce British history from European history is incredibly ignorant, and I find it quite galling. In point of fact, if we want to really get down to it, Great Britain is a relatively new island in geological terms. Unless I'm mistaken, it's only been an island since the last ice age. Ireland has been an island for far, far longer. I believe it's around 50,000 years. Great Britain, about 8,000 years. In geological terms, that is relatively recent. In fact, it's a blip. In fact, it's thought that what is now the North Sea at the time of the last ice age may have been a marshy bank, Dogger Bank. So I'm not saying we're just another European country. There is definitely a unique British identity. I believe this is a special nation. Um, in the 19th century, it goes without saying we were the foremost global power, and that didn't come about from just being another European nation. The British were unique. There's no question about that, and I value that. I'm proud to be British. But I find a lot of the Brexiteer narrative is this idea we're not Europeans. It's a right to say that, but Britain is a European country. Whether we're in the EU or not, we are a European country. And my question would be this: if we're not a European country, then which continent do we belong to? You know, if you have a basic knowledge of geography, the world's divided into six continents, broadly speaking. There's some argument over the exact definition of that, but let's say North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia, and Oceania. And some would say Antarctic. So seven continents, right? Okay, so every country in the world is either politically, culturally, or geographically part of a continent. If we're not part of Europe, then where is Britain? Are we just an island floating in the Atlantic? No, we're a European country. We're a unique European country, and we are a unique nation. There's no question about that. But I find that really galling, just blatant ignorance. And whenever I've brought up this point, the response from Brexiteers has been little laughing emojis and pathetic little memes because that's all they can produce. I'm not talking about all Leave people. And funnily enough, Brexiteer leaders um, are themselves, they have close ties to the rest of Europe. I mean, Nigel Farage's wife is German. Um, Michael Gove is a pretty cosmopolitan guy. These people aren't what, let's put it, the negative stereotype of Leavers often is. They're smart people. They're intelligent. They're often cosmopolitan. So it's not a case of. I just find it galling. I mean, I get that you hate the EU, but this animosity towards Europe, the continent, is particularly astonishing when they go on to say, "Oh, but we're not against Europe." Okay, so prove it. Stop treating the rest of Europe like they're our enemy. I mean, put it this way, are Eurosceptics in France and the Netherlands, are they not European? They are European. They may say they're French first or Dutch first, but Europe is a unique continent. One of the great things about Europe, wherever you think of the EU, tell me somewhere else in the world, anywhere, where there has been such a long sustained period of peace as this continent. Tell me any other continent that has contributed so much to the development of the modern world as Europe. You could argue the United States as the sole superpower has guided that, but the American Constitution is very much based on European principles. So there is nowhere else in the world, I would argue, that has been at such a forefront of human innovation and um, and liberty as Europe. And quite often, people on the populist right will find kinship in other right wing groups across the continent. So that in itself shows that we're connected. So I mentioned sentiment. I'm a European, and no one will tell me otherwise. I don't say I'm a European first. I'm British first. I'm Northern Irish, and I'm European in roughly that order. But I do feel European, and I'm proud of it. So Leave people have a right to say that they're not European. But if you really think that British history, British identity is totally, totally divorced from the rest of Europe, you just don't know history. I would suggest you get out a history book and educate yourself on this because where do you think the Romans, the Normans, the Jutes, where do you think all those groups of people who were so, so influential in shaping our history, where did they come from? Even recent dynasties, the Hanoverians, Hanover. So yes, we're a unique nation, but we are not totally, totally isolated from the rest of Europe, and nor will we ever be, as far as I'm concerned.